Right, good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. This is our second panel session of our Farrow & Co. Entrepreneurs Week 2020, which we've designed for the specific purpose of celebrating and supporting entrepreneurs in these unprecedented times. My name is Tom Bruce. I'm Head of Entrepreneurs and Investors at Farrow's. For those of you who don't know much about us, at Farrow's, our focus is on acting for private businesses, family businesses, entrepreneurs, and investors. We continue to be thrilled this week by the level of engagement in our Entrepreneurs Week. We've now had more than 2,000 attendees accepting for the sessions, and we hope, as they continue to be yesterday and this morning, that we will continue to have a really engaging and exciting series of events. Please do take a look at our microsite. The link will be in the chat bar shortly, and you'll find out everything you need to know about the week and how we work with entrepreneurs and investors throughout the year. If you haven't already, please do sign up for our closing session on Friday at 5 p.m. There's going to be an hour of alcoholic and non-alcoholic cocktail making and networking, and we've got some fantastic prizes on offer from some of our clients, and they will actually be really worth having, so please do sign up for that. A quick couple of housekeeping points before I sign it over to Beth to introduce the session and then on to Charlotte. Please do use the Q&A. The panel have got plenty to say, but actually they'd love to hear your questions, whether that's during the session or by following up afterwards. So please do contribute those. It will be recorded, so we can share it afterwards for those who haven't been able to make it. And in fact, all recordings of all of our sessions and key takeaways will be up on the microsite after the week. So that's enough from me. Really excited about this session, delighted with the panelists that have been kind enough to give us their time. And I'd now like to welcome my co-host for this session, Beth Bolcom. It's on She Owns It, Leadership, Breaking Stereotypes and Celebrating Success as a Female Founder. And Beth will introduce the session.
Thanks, Tom, and a huge warm welcome to everybody for joining our Female Entrepreneurs session of Entrepreneurs Week 2020. Here at Farrow's, we appreciate that diversity and inclusion are core to our values as a firm, and so fostering those values is a top priority to us and really important when it comes to our work with entrepreneurs. Sadly, however, the founder world is a prime example of where the opportunities available are not necessarily always the same for each person. And gender is an area in which those inequalities often lie. So for those of you who might have joined us last year, you might remember that the Female Entrepreneurs session focused on the fact that female founders often don't receive the same sort of funding as their male counterparts. Today's panel session, as Tom mentioned, will be on what it takes to be a female leader today. And although challenges do still exist, we're seeing this session as basically a chance to really celebrate female leadership. Tom and I are therefore delighted to be joined by a panel of really inspiring female founders. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Charlotte Gentry. Charlotte's the founder and CEO of Pure Communications Group and continues to show incredibly strong leadership skills, especially during the pandemic, as the event sector has obviously been especially affected.
Thank you very much, Beth. It's lovely to be, I'm very excited to be a part of this session today and to be chairing an incredibly esteemed and diverse panel of female leaders. I'm hoping that today we can all provide a huge amount of insight and indeed some tips to everybody that's attending today, so that everybody walks away with some really valuable insights from our panelists. I have been an entrepreneur for most of my life and started a concierge business at the age of 24 and currently own an integrated live events and communications business, which, as I'm sure you can all imagine, has been enormously challenged over the last 6 months and continues to do so. So I think there might be a little bit of discussion around some of that in terms of how all of our businesses have found these times challenging. However, I continue to be enormously inspired by the women that I meet constantly at leadership tables, and I'm delighted to introduce our panelists today, who I hope will give a little bit of a background as to all of their individual journeys. So I will start with Anushka Dukas, who is the founder and creative director of fine jewelry brand Anushka, and who was a co-founder of Links of London. Anushka, do you want to give a bit of background about your journey?
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, my journey, we started Links of London, in 1990, I think it was now. And I started that with my husband, and we built it up into approximately 50 stores worldwide, and sold it in 2006 to a company called Folly that some of you may know of, in its current demise. And I started Anushka in 2009. And it's very much still within the jewelry sector, with a rather different sector. So this is all 18 karat gold fine jewelry, and we continue. We're based in London. We have 9 stores or concessions in London, and 2 in Hong Kong, and just launching into China, where we have 12 counters. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Anushka. Farah Kabir, who's the co-founder of Hanks, alongside being an accomplished chartered accountant. Hanks being an intimate wellness brand. Perhaps, Farah, you could give us a little bit of information about your journey. Or not.
I think Farah might be on mute.
Sorry, my bad.
That's okay.
Take 2.
Thanks, Farah.
Hi guys, thank you for having me. As mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Hanks. It is an intimate and sexual wellness brand designed with women in mind. So my previous background was actually in investment banking at Goldman Sachs. So completely unrelated to condoms and lubricants. And alongside my co-founder, he's a gynecology doctor, we both spotted a gap in the market for contraceptives targeted at women as opposed to men. And we launched our hero product, Hanks, which is vegan, sustainable, and as considered as your skincare regime should be. So we launched in 2017, both online and in stores such as Boots, Holland & Barrett, and Superdrug.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Farah. Dr. Uoma, who is the CEO of Skin Doctor, and has worked with a number of global beauty brands over the course of her career. Perhaps you could give us some more information, Uoma, about your journey.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Charlotte. Well, it's been a whole journey, quite a short one. So for those who don't know, I'm a medical doctor as well as a cosmetic doctor. And I trained at the University of Liverpool, so Liverpool Medical School, and then qualified as a doctor in 2015, so actually not that long ago. And worked as a couple of years in the NHS as a doctor. And as rewarding as it was, I did grow quite kind of disillusioned quite quickly. And I guess, you know, kind of setting up Skin Doctor was really my way out, and a real way of, I guess, me kind of stepping into my true purpose and just really manifesting just everything that I've kind of dreamt, essentially. So Skin Doctor is essentially a skincare solutions brand, both in real life and online. I have a clinic based in Soho, London, and we've been featured in a whole host of publications, everything from British Vogue, Marie Claire, what else? A whole ton of publications. And then also we've worked with amazing brands globally, specifically in a brand ambassador role, which includes Elemis, Vichy, and La Roche-Posay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Uoma. And Dominique Moss, who is the founder of Return Hub and has worked for 20 years in the financial sector. Perhaps, Dominique, you could give us a little bit of insight about your journey, and also having worked in quite a male-orientated environment, what that was like for you.
You're on mute, Dominique.
Sorry. Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, Faraz. Hi, everyone. So I've worked in the city for over 20 years. I started my career as a headhunter actually in 2001, about 4 days before 9/11. And I ended up running a fixed income business at the search firm I work for, placing bankers basically at most of the banks at one time or another. And after about 13 years, I realized it became very clear to me there was a huge gap in the search market, in the executive search market, so recruitment at that sort of mid and senior level. And really that was working with individuals who'd had a great career, had 10, 15 years career in the city in financial services. They'd then gone and done something else. Very often, obviously, it was raising a family, but certainly not always. But when the time came for them to go back to their corporate career, found it very difficult through the traditional recruiting methods. And it became really clear, you had all these companies saying, we'd love to hire more women, there just aren't any. And all these women going, well, hang on a minute, I'm over here. But the bit that would connect them, traditional recruitment, wasn't really built for them. And so that's really why I set up the Return Hub. And we now place mainly women back into roles in the financial sector. And our clients range from household names like HSBC, UBS, Invesco, Royal London, to startups, family offices, fintechs. We also very well understood that we wouldn't be able to get everyone a job, nice as that would be. So developed a whole suite of free resources for all of our candidates to help with things like CV writing, LinkedIn profile writing, and interview skills. And we do a lot of campaigning as well. So we regularly talk in the media and television and national press on the topic of diversity, and particularly women in work and women in the financial sector and the future of work. And one of the things that we've been doing whilst we have seen a huge drop off in the levels of recruitment during the pandemic is launch actually going to beta testing for our Digital Career Academy, which we'll be launching in January, which will hopefully help more of our candidates in their journey back to work.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dominique. And finally, Lee Jagger, who now owns a business called The Ideas Clinic, but used to be CEO of Bank Sadler Group, which is an enormous live events agency, or perhaps smaller than it once was in these current climes, but has took a small agency to one of the biggest, certainly in Europe, and then went through an M&A and sale to American Express. So maybe Lee, you can give us a bit of insight into what that journey looked like for you.
So I think maybe my journey's being a little bit longer than some of the others on the panel. So I have been in the events industry for well over 30 years, and I guess I fell into it rather than had made a concerted effort to get into it. I worked for Mercedes-Benz in their events team as part of my degree on my placement year, and sort of fell in love with the world of events from there, really. I was very fortunate and was in the right place and worked very hard, and I got my first MD's role at 25, which was a bit scary in hindsight, but at 25 you've got the confidence, and I just ran with it. And then I joined Bank Sadler, which is the company Charlotte mentioned, I guess nearly 20 years ago. When I joined, there were 30 of us in a small office in Camden, and we grew that to well over 300 with offices in France, Germany, US, China, Poland. We worked for some great organisations like L'Oreal, GSK, Allergan, loads of pharmaceutical companies, Accenture. So, you know, really with a breadth of different clients and with different needs. And then, as Charlotte referenced, in 2017 we were acquired by American Express, so became probably one of the biggest event management agencies globally, and certainly in the UK. And I helped with the integration over 2018, and then stepped away to set up the Ideas Clinic. And essentially what I do now is I'm on a number of boards as a non-exec. I work in the charity sector in terms of supporting their boards, and also I do a lot of mentoring and advising. And interestingly, although not exclusively, a lot of the people I work with and mentor are female leaders. So it's very interesting and very timely that I'm chatting today.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lee. I suppose one of the interesting questions that I'd like to pose to the panel is what often deters women for going for and pursuing leadership roles. I mean, certainly in the live event sector, where I've been for my career, the sector is largely operated by women, but a lot of the agencies are owned by men. And are there obstacles that still stand in the way of women reaching the C-suite level. Dominique, do you have any views around that based on the fact that you've spent quite a long time working in the city?
Oh yes, I've got lots of views on that. I mean, I think that, you know, that there are many kinks in the talent pipeline that that prevent or slow down the kind of career paths of women. And it's really easy to sort of say, well, you know, it's children, isn't it? You know, they're not as ambitious and all this sort of thing. But you know, I think it just comes back to the fact that the reality is that the place of work is something that was, you know, the structure of work was something that was set up, you know, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and hasn't really changed that much. And that was to really set up by men, for men, and according to rules that perhaps they understand better than women do. And I think that as well, one of the things is that we are told all the time that, you know, do a good job, this place is a meritocracy, you know, just do a good job, work hard, and you'll get a tap on the shoulder. And actually that's not the case. You know, the place of work is not a meritocracy. And I think not necessarily having understanding of the importance of things like impact, you know, your ability to have an impact at work, and also your exposure, you know, who knows you and who knows what you've done, you know, that those sort of things need to be given much more emphasis. You know, there are many other things. I think there's the role model thing as well. You know, you can't be what you can't see to some extent. A lack of female role models, I think, can be quite off-putting, and we certainly see that with candidates that we introduce to organisations. You know, if they're not interviewed by and meeting senior women in that organisation, then they have a look and think, gosh, you know, is there anyone that looks like me at the top of this organisation? And if there isn't, you know, that can be a big issue.
I mean, Dr. Uoma, I mean, I think obviously you're in the beauty sector, and with a business such as the Skin Doctor. I mean, do you see, obviously, presumably you must work largely with women. Do you see that perhaps there's a reverse in your sector, and you're seeing far fewer men actually getting to the top of the industry of your industry? Is there a reverse there, perhaps?
Yeah, in a way, because actually, you know, obviously being a cosmetic doctor, I really do straddle two industries. So yes, the beauty industry, but also more so the kind of clinical aesthetics industry, where actually, obviously that's dominated by Harley Street doctors, who are typically men, and typically middle-aged men. And so actually, you know, I really stand out amongst a very male-heavy industry in that sense. But in terms of beauty, yes, you're very correct. I do deal with women most of the day. But in terms of, you know, again, the C-suite of these, you know, beauty brands and organizations, it'd be interesting to see whether females are equally represented there.
Yeah, no, sure. And I believe, obviously, you've had, you know, quite a lot of experience within the sort of diversity and inclusivity area as an entrepreneur. I mean, how has that affected, do you think, your rise as a female leader?
Yeah, I think it's been quite an interesting journey, because obviously, you know, obviously today we're talking about, you know, being a female entrepreneur, but obviously being a Black woman, I straddle two intersections of being Black and being a woman, right? That adds a whole nother layer to the entrepreneurial journey. And so I think in many ways it's been, you know, something that's really allowed me to stand out. And if you could say, it's kind of been like my USP, because again, there's not really any Black female cosmetic doctors in this space on a mainstream level. And I think also, you know, on a customer level as well, I feel like, you know, my brand really speaks to all women, but especially ethnic women. And they tell me that that's a key reason why they want to see me, because they just assume that also, you know, being ethnic, that I automatically understand their skin concerns and their pain points. But equally, on the other hand, I would say, you know, it has made the journey quite difficult as well. So I find that, and, you know, I'm sure, you know, a lot of us on the panel have had to go through this, you know, really trying or having to, you know, assert yourself and almost act up, and just make it clear that actually you do know what you're talking about and you are actually qualified. So yeah, so those are some of the kind of obstacles that I've come across.
I mean, you've also had to raise funding, I believe, for your business. Do you feel that you had any more challenges being a woman trying to raise funding? Did you feel that was a challenge for you, or was the funding element quite easy for you? How did you find that?
Yeah, well, actually, in terms of funding the business today, it's very much been through savings and business loans. And actually, that process was pretty simple. Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, actually, I'm curious on the funding side of things, and maybe I'll address the same question to Anushka, who obviously has been in retail for the majority of her career journey. Anushka, I don't know whether you can perhaps give an insight into what it was like having to raise funding, presumably to open more and more stores, and being the success that you've been.
We were incredibly lucky in that we had one investor with very deep pockets, and so
everybody needs one of those.
Yeah, no, we all need one of those, because I suspect that the banks would have been a lot less helpful. But I mean, I do know that, I think only 2% of women actually are successful in getting venture capital funding, for example. So I know it's very, very difficult, but for us, we were very fortunate, and after that, the banks have supported us, but then we have a good track record, so that has helped. I think it'd be particularly difficult as you're starting out, and that's much more difficult. I suspect now, I mentor a lot of young women in business, and it's really tough, particularly now. Lee, I'm sure you can talk to that quite nicely.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was speaking to one of the young ladies that I was mentoring yesterday, and it is in this given environment, and I guess I'm from the background of a meeting and events world as well, which frankly is being decimated at the moment. It is incredibly challenging, but then I have to say, I'm not sure it'd be any less challenging for a male person in that particular scenario, because I think, as Charlotte referenced, I think certainly the meetings and events environment is very female dominated, and whilst I think Charlotte said, at the senior level, potentially of owner level, it historically used to be, I think, more male dominated. I think even there's been a significant shift. So I think, many of the things that we can talk about around leadership characteristics, I would struggle to put that down to a gender, because I think in my environment, it's a very female dominated environment. And I think obviously there's differences there, but it certainly doesn't come down just to gender.
Sure. Do you, Lee, do you, from the businesses that you've mentored or whatever, in terms of like the stereotype of what a successful leader should be, do you think we can stereotype those characteristics anymore between male and female characteristics, or do you think that actually it's become a much more blended scenario now?
I think, I'd like to caveat everything that I'm saying with the environment that I work in is very female dominated, but I would say to that it is very blended. I think it's about industry sector and industry type, it's the people that you work with, and, and obviously I've had I've been in that lucky position of, whilst I was in the events industry, we've reached out into many different industry sectors, manufacturing, cosmetics, pharmaceutical, and the people you work with are looking for different things from their leaders. I mean, at the very core, there is still the same empathy and decision making and everything else, but I guess you manage in a slightly different way in the creative sector than perhaps you do in the manufacturing sector. So for me, it isn't necessarily around, as I say, the gender, it's around the people that you're managing and tailoring it to that, really.
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely. I want Farah. I mean, I believe. I mean, are most of the people that that work for your business largely female? I believe that you might have quite a male-heavy board. So I just wondered how you find that dynamic within your business.
So all the employees in our group are female. However, we do have board members that are male. We've also raised investments. We've raised over $1 million to date from angels, and I'd say about 40 to 45% of those angels are female. So I echo some of the sentiments that I've heard throughout this conversation around how women are not backed. And I think there's a stat in there about how for every pound of VC investment, less than a penny goes to female founders, which I still find shocking. And that only came out last year. It was research from the British Bank. And I think we're making strides, but I think there's a lot more we can do. And I think even though we have men on our board, it doesn't hinder us. I think it's good to have a mix of men and women, but I think what we need is for the males to be allies in this journey of moving the needle to equality for women. So yeah.
I was going to ask you actually, how do you, as a founder of a business like yours, how do you find and recruit the support that you need at a leadership level, and also how do you what do you think are the skills that are required for you to manage a team as well? Because obviously what you've achieved as a business is enormously inspiring to, I suspect, a number of our attendees today. So I think it'd be helpful for them to understand, how you get support when running a business, when you've actually managed to achieve, $1 million in angel investor support and etc., just to keep the engine running.
Yeah, I mean, there's one key resource that has helped me throughout, and that's a company called Women on Boards. I can't tell you how amazing that resource has been, both in terms of leadership skills and learning, and also getting access to the right sort of advisors. And we also used Women on Boards when we were hiring for a chairperson as well. So that's a great resource that has helped me. I mean, I think even throughout my previous career in banking, having mentors really helped. So Anushka and Leigh, I think it's great what you're doing with female founders as well, and helping them, because having that sounding board from someone who has experience has been helpful, both in my career professionally and also with Hanks. So we have mentors and advisors that help us, both industry leaders and people who've been in sort of the beauty, the cosmetic business. I've also got MSL, who is a great mentor to us. She founded Killing Kittens and Sisters, and you've got to remember, our industry is male dominated. It's the adult industry, and there's only one key player that makes condoms, and they begin with a D. And so everyone knows that. So they're not used to people coming in and disrupting that industry, and being two young women who are disrupting that industry. So it's important to have allies and mentorship with regards to our business, and also building the business.
I know MSL quite well, actually, funnily enough. Yeah, she's a part of a sort of social group. So Anushka, I mean, obviously you have an MBE, which is obviously really quite something. And I just wonder whether you might, as a CEO of a couple of businesses, what you think are the key characteristics that you need to ensure that you are successful in that role.
Well, the first thing is really important is I'm not CEO, and I've always had a CEO, because my skills are not being a CEO. And I think one of the very important things is to recognize what your skills are. I'm much more entrepreneurial than I am CEO. So I'm lots of ideas. My husband, my partner's my husband, and we have lots of ideas all the time, and far too many. And so the challenge for the CEO is to decide what, to help us decide what are the important ones. So I think one of the key things in finding a CEO is to recognize your own weaknesses, or and where you need support, and that's been absolutely vital throughout, both at Links of London, where I guess at the beginning I ran it for probably about 3 years, and then John gave up his law career and joined, and it became very clear that neither of us were cut out to run a business day to day, and we needed somebody much more methodical, much more able to kind of see it through, if you like, as opposed to just the ideas, because the detail is absolutely critical. And I think you'll talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who've got lots and lots of ideas, but they're not necessarily great at the detail. Certainly not as it gets bigger. It might be all right at the beginning, but as it gets bigger, you tend to lose sight of the detail, and that's critical. And funny enough, actually, that detail is something that during COVID, whilst we had to furlough a huge amount of our team, it meant that for the first time in a very long time, I got right back to the detail. And that's been a kind of invigorating, probably deeply irritating for lots of other people, but it is important because it takes you back to where you started in the first place.
Yeah, apologies, Anushka. Yeah, of course, absolutely. And, you know, I think what you're saying there is absolutely 100% correct, is understanding what your strengths and where your strengths and weaknesses lie to be able to build a good team around you to take a business forward is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, no, that really is. And I think, you know, I've always said this, but I think one of the key things is not to be frightened to employ people who are better than you. Because I think as an entrepreneur, you always are a bit frightened. You kind of think, oh gosh, you know, they shouldn't be better than me. But boy, does it make your life easier, and boy, does it make your business better.
Too right. Couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a fantastic piece of advice. I mean, Dominique, from your perspective, you know, in terms of any key leadership lessons that you might have learned in your career, can you give us any input in terms of what you think those might be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely agree with Anushka. I completely, that totally resonates with me. I was actually really lucky that when I set my business up, I got back in touch with an old colleague of mine who's CEO, and you know, she runs the business, and she's absolutely brilliant. She's very much the detail person, and I'm very much the sort of front of house and, you know, on the client side. So understanding what you're good at and where you need to bring someone in for help is absolutely key. I'm also going to slightly steal from someone else in my sort of top tips, because I went to a brilliant session a couple of years ago on International Women's Day with Debbie Wasco, who set up with Anna Jones, the Albright. And someone said to her, actually, what's your best advice? And she said she uses the 3 Gs, which stands for grit, graft, and the gym. I totally get the grit and the graft. I'm going to swap, in my case, the gym for gin. Hopefully does the same thing, hopefully. But yeah, I mean, it's the grit and the graft. And I think, you know, it's not to be underestimated how challenging the level of hard work. You know, they say when you set up a business, and this totally again is my experience, is you never have more fun at the beginning in those early stages. It's never more hard work, and you never kind of work for so little.
Yeah.
But you know, I think very often, you know, once you're a bit further down the line, you look back on those early years and it's thrilling and exciting, but it is the grit and the graft that kind of keeps you going.
I mean, 100%. I mean, I wonder whether, you know, I mean, does one, what provides that drive, do you think? I wonder, Lee, whether you've got a view on this, you know, whether it's one's environment or background or what it is that creates the drive to want to be a success. You know, are we all conditioned to now, are we trying to still prove something? You know, what is it that creates that drive, do you think?
Different for different people, you know, and I think, you know, we've heard some of the stories of the panelists as to what's pushed them to do, and, you know, sometimes it's born out of adversity or, you know, something that they're not happy with, and sometimes in my instance you fall into it and find something you love. But, you know, and I think we were talking about this the other day around the diversity and backgrounds of what people look like, and I think I probably didn't come from a normal background. You know, I grew up in a working class environment in the northeast. I lived on a council estate until I was, I don't know, 10 or 11. I was the first generation in my family to go to university. So, you know, there wasn't any expectation on me to become this person or to do this thing. But I guess what I would say is I've always wanted to be the best at what I did, you know, even if it was just the little things. I like to win, I like to succeed, I don't have to be the best, I just have to give the best. And I think generally, you know, that sort of gets the reputation and the experience, and you come to a point in your career where you can sort of really take that and run with it. And so I'd say that, you know, the people I know who've done incredibly well have, you know, as Dominique said, have worked incredibly hard, but they've just got that passion and that drive, and they really want to be successful, and they'll do what it takes to get there.
I mean, this is a bit of a, I suppose, a bit of a controversial question, but I suppose to anybody that wants to take it on, you know, is there a difference? Well, clearly there is a difference between the way that men and women manage teams. Is there, you know, are there traits that women excel at rather than men, or are there things that women need to work on to be to enhance their skill set? What do you think, Farah, perhaps?
I mean, it's controversial, but dare I say, we need to be more ballsy. You know, perfect example about how when men and women apply for the same job, and for men, I can't remember the exact stat, but on the job description, they make out they can do the majority of it, whereas women really look at what's on the job description and accurately say, okay, I've not done this before, but this. Whereas you need to sort of back yourself. And I know there's also this whole speak about women being too bossy and too moved, but actually we need to have a voice and it needs to be heard. And for so long, people have been used to women sort of being a bit meek and mild and not being able to get what they want. So I'd say be more ballsy, if I'm allowed to say that.
Sure. Dr. Uoma, what's your take on that? Do you find that, you know, there are certain skills that women have that men don't have in order to manage teams more effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm probably going to say something quite controversial as well. I feel like I absolutely agree with you, Farah, in terms of, you know, a lot of women do struggle with, say, speaking up and really advocating for themselves. But I feel like also there's a growing proportion of women in which I belong to, where actually we're not afraid of advocating for ourselves, and we are ballsy, and we don't care whether, you know, people feel that in our assertion or in placing boundaries, you know, people think that we're catty or the B word, or yeah, really. So that's what I would say to that. In terms of the more softer skills, I think kind of the beauty of women is that we're really able to balance that kind of more masculine and feminine energy. And so whilst I am pretty ballsy and, you know, have that sort of energy, I'm equally quite, I guess, more sensitive in the way that I kind of manage my team, with everything from, you know, just the simple things like taking an interest in, you know, my team's lives, like, are they parents? Are they single parents? Things of that nature. And also just really playing to their strengths. And then with that, also just kind of setting boundaries of communication as well. So I don't know about the other panelists on here, but I absolutely love Slack. I'm obsessed with it. And I think, you know, since transitioning the team onto that, from things like WhatsApp and emails here and there, it just really streamlines communication, and just makes everyone a lot happier, and also everyone's really on the same page. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I wonder whether there are. I mean, I certainly in my journey have found that as a founder and indeed a CEO, that the competitive element of managing people who are perhaps just underneath you, you know, and other women is, I found personally quite challenging and not that easy. Because, you know, how do we handle, I mean, women can be quite competitive by nature. How do you handle that dynamic? Is it different managing another woman who might be in a, you know, only one step down the rung for you, or you're number two, as opposed to managing a man in that situation? What do those dynamics look like? And perhaps I would throw that question out to Lee.
Okay. I think it's what's interesting is that I've had this conversation across the board with my team and banks, and they were a mix of men and women. And I think, you know, so whilst I don't think it's necessarily a gender thing, my experience in that scenario was that the women really still want to be liked. You know, they find it difficult to maybe make some of the tougher decisions and say what they need to say because they still want to be liked by everyone. And I think it's a bit of a sea change and a step to realize you don't have to be liked. You know, you want to be respected, you want to be seen to be making fair decisions, you want to be honest and have integrity, and through that you will create, you know, people will like you and respect you, but you're not necessarily looking to build a new network of friends. And I think that's certainly something in my experience, and maybe it isn't a gender thing, maybe it was just where I was, but certainly the women had a little bit more of a challenge with that, and the men were able to just to say what they needed to say without necessarily worrying about the feelings around it. some of the emotion that went with it. And I don't know whether the other panelists have seen the same, but certainly it was that wanting to be everybody's friend as well and be seen to be nice and kind, but you still have to make some tough decisions sometimes.
Well, and actually, I mean, I think that's an interesting point that, how do you strike that balance? And that's often really not very easy to do, to be compassionate when somebody's having a tough time, but at the same time then have to, wrap somebody over the knuckles if something's not being done effectively enough. How do you strike that balance, do you think?
I think it's difficult, which is why I think everyone finds it so challenging. But I think, you have to work on the basis of openness and honesty, and, and people knowing that you're always going to be true to them, and you've got integrity. And then that goes with the ups and the downs, isn't it? So, I think if you can take people on the journey with you when things are going well, and you share in that success, and you recognize that success, and you acknowledge it, then, you also have to feel comfortable in possibly cascading bad news or making tough decisions. Certainly now, when times are really difficult in the current economic climate, I think it's really important that you have that honest and open relationship with your team, or your team, your client, and everything else. So because I think people then trust you and trust your brand, and your personal brand. I think that's really important.
So Inushka, presumably, as the creative brain behind your brands, you've had a sizable board working alongside you. Were you very hands-on with managing the teams under that, or was that really the responsibility of your board?
The first time round, I clearly I had to manage my teams as well. I mean, we were very careful not to have very big boards. I think the maximum I've ever had on a board is 6, and we're now 5 now. So I have had to do that. I think, honesty and, being able to be very straight and to praise when praise is due. And I mean, very much what Lee said, but kind of honesty, I think that's how you get respect. I think if you don't have the respect, nobody wants to hear good or bad news, to be honest. So I really do think that's very important. And respect, I think, is earned in so many different ways. But I mean, leading by example and treating other people the way you'd like to be treated. I mean, however basic that may sound, that is kind of human nature. That for me, that's the most important thing. That if your team can't say that about you, I don't think you're doing a very good job of leading.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, are the key characteristics for a successful leadership to you? What would they look like?
Sorry, was that question to me?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Well, the first thing, I know this is a bit weird, but the first thing is I want them to love what they do. If they're not going to come to me and they're not interested in jewelry, they're not interested in retail, they're not interested in our world, that's the first thing. I mean, they have to be genuinely interested, because if you don't love it, you're not going to do a good job. And no matter how hard you try, you'll always know. I always have known when somebody isn't happy, and when they've decided to leave. Very unusual. I've been surprised, because you kind of know. I think that's possibly part of being a woman. I think intuitive, being intuitive is perhaps something that that women are naturally more than men, particularly if you have quite a good balance. A large part of your team are women. I think that's critical. Is one, having fun. Now, because of my age, I absolutely want total technical expertise. Don't know if you noticed, but I managed to, my computer broke down at the beginning of this session, and if I hadn't had my team here, I wouldn't be on the call. So, do you know what I mean? So technical, all of that technical, but database management, all of the things that the modern world absolutely requires. And it seems incredibly obvious, but I am hopeless at it, and I couldn't do it without a team that are hugely able and very efficient. I totally realise that most people probably think that sounds absolutely inane, but it is really important.
Not in the slightest. It goes back to the point you made about being able to recognise what you can and what you can't do, and have somebody else that can step into the brink.
Well, yeah, and as I say, and I think it's, you know, it's so important to have a balanced team who, you know, so for me, I need to make sure I've got a younger team than me, so that I'm understanding how things are evolving and how they're thinking, because they're thinking very differently to me and my husband and our CEO. So, you know, we really look for that, and we really look to them to help us, keep us kind of relevant and informed. So those are some of the things. I'm sure lots of other people got other ideas.
We've actually got some really great questions. So thank you very much for submitting the questions online. And there's one from, there's a couple actually from Heather Dix. And what was the greatest challenge for you when breaking into the sector as an entrepreneur, and how did you overcome that? So I would address that to Dominique.
I've worked in the sector actually for pretty much all of my career as a headhunter, and you know, I'm absolutely full of admiration for anyone who starts a business in an area that they don't know and haven't done before, because I think if I hadn't, I mean, I was doing something new and it was something very unique, and there is no other firm that really does what we do. But I had lots of advantages when I set my business up, and you know, I had a lot of really good client relationships that I you know, clients I'd worked with for many, many years. I think also I understood that that there were certain things going on in the sort of bigger picture in the wider world that were going to be very helpful to me being able to set my business up. One of them was the government's Women in Finance Charter, which had recently come in and had asked all companies in the sector to set targets for greater gender balance. And so it became very clear that if all these companies were going to need, you know, were going to meet their targets, they would have to look at a new pool of talent. And if we could do that in a curated way, you know, we were going to be able to add a lot of value. So I think it's really important in you know, when setting up a business, is thinking, you know, what problems are you solving and what's going on in the bigger picture, and what are the levers that are going on, that are being pulled externally that can help you be a success. Yeah, I think that's probably, that was one of the most helpful things. I think the other thing also that I was very lucky with, that I actually set my business up. I was actually initially an intrapreneur rather than entrepreneur. So I set my business up while I was still working for someone else. It was a bit of a side hustle that we didn't really know where it was going to go. And that meant that I had, you know, I had a salary coming in. And actually when we all decided, my boss and we decided that actually the business is going to go their separate ways, he was actually amazing and said, look, I love what you're doing. You can have 2-3 desks for 6 months and then you can go on your way. And that was really game changing for us, because we didn't need to have any investors. We was totally self-funding. We managed to get a few things done quite early on. And as a professional services business, actually, really, you should be able to get some cash in quite quickly. So I think, you know, you need a bit of luck.
So we've had another question posed by Rachel. Have there been any conversations any of you have had with individuals in your career, in your lifetime, that have been real game changers in terms of how you have decided to drive things forward from there on in? Does anybody have any thoughts on that question, or any examples maybe they could lead with? Perhaps, I mean, I'm just thinking.
I read a book once. I mean, I'm sure that I'm absolutely sure there have been lots of conversations. I just can't remember them now. But there's a book that I read a long time ago called Hug Your Customer. And it was just, that actually was it changed my view about so much. It absolutely made me put myself in the shoes of the customer, which sounds so obvious, but so many people don't do that. And it was all about how you make your customer feel absolutely the most important person in the world. And that was a game changer, actually.
That's very interesting. Does anybody else have any other examples?
Yeah, just to add to that. So I think for me and my journey, because obviously, you know, I've worked with a doctor in the NHS and then made that transition into being a full-time entrepreneur. And I know obviously transition from full-time employment into kind of the business space is, you know, really something that many women out there are trying to do. I would definitely say it was the conversations and just the interactions that I had with my patients in hospital. And obviously, as you can imagine, you know, I came across really heartbreaking stories, really heartbreaking situations of, you know, patients that were actually relatively young. So, you know, even in their 30s with things like terminal cancer and really grave diagnoses. And I think that really just helped to shift things for me in my mind and really just made me realize that actually the fact that we're relatively healthy, you know, not taking into account COVID, but, you know, we're all healthy, you know, we have a world of opportunity at our feet. And the fact that we're still alive, it's like we really do have to grab life by the horns with no regrets. And I think because of that, I feel like that's why I am so fearless in how I pursue business, because, you know, I've seen how life really has come and gone with you know, with my patients, and one minute I'm speaking to them and, you know, and the next minute I'm certifying their dead body. And so there really is no time to be second guessing yourself or to be afraid to sell yourself. Yeah, that's been a major point for me.
Somebody once said to me, and it's a lesson that I've certainly learned over my career, is, and on many occasions, being in the service industry, I've received a really particularly irritating email from somebody or something that's really got my goat. And without, or it may indeed have been somebody who worked for me, I've taken minimum 24 hours to respond and stepped away and not drafted a response in the heat of the moment. And that's, I think I have learned the hard way very early on in my career, being slightly more impetuous, perhaps in my 20s, than I am now in my 40s. But it was a pretty valuable lesson that, that I've learned, certainly, over the course of time. I think, so Dominique has posed a question, which is obviously surrounding the working environment that we currently sit in now. And you know, how do we think the pandemic will change working patterns and structures to change the state of play at the top of industries and increase the opportunities for women in leadership roles? Are you seeing any relevant shifts within your industries, or is it just another topic that people will pay lip service to without any action? Does anybody have a view on that?
I can chip in on that. I mean, I think it's really a bit early to tell totally what's going to happen. I mean, certainly in the city, I was in yesterday. It was extremely quiet. Most of the shops were empty. The cafes and bars, you know, some were fairly busy. And talking to clients all the time, a lot of them are at about 20%, at about 20% capacity. I spoke to one today that was about 45% capacity. So, and I think obviously what's happening now with the increase in infection, I can't imagine that going up. It'll probably go back the other way. I think that there are several things at play here, but one of them will be the kind of cost savings that companies can have by having, you know, smaller offices. And so that I think will drive more of a sort of flexible working approach. And I think obviously there are a lot of people, you know, men and women who are not going to want to go back to the sort of, you know, the full on, the commuting every day life that they had before. And I think as companies see that productivity in many, many cases has not dropped off. And that's even in an environment where they're not just working from home in normal scenario, they're working from home in a very, you know, stressful and, you know, managing other things at the same time. So, and I think that will also give companies access to a much broader talent pool. You know, they'll be able to cast the net further and wider. And you know, arguably women could be a major beneficiary of a move towards more flexible working opportunities.
Does anybody else have any views around the change in working structure based on the pandemic and how that affects the role that women play in the workplace?
That was incredibly succinct, Dominic.
I know. And anybody better that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely perfect.
Iman has also posed a question. As an entrepreneur, I would expect you're going to hear a lot of people saying no, and you might face a lot of rejection. How do you develop the ability to withstand rejection? I mean, my personal answer to that is tenacity, and to keep going. I mean, certainly in our business, we have written thousands of presentations and proposals and pitches and tenders and for business. And there's no way that you can ever expect to win them all. And you've got to fall off the horse and just get straight back on it again and just keep going, knowing that, you know, we're in a creative sector. So it's like going for a job interview almost sort of, you know, every week of your life really in our business, and representing yourself time and time again as the face of a business. You know, one just has to be incredibly tenacious. I don't know what anybody else's view is on that. Maybe Lee, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think very similar to yours, Charlotte. I think, you know, at the end of the day, and I think Anushka mentioned it earlier, if you've got the right team around you, you are going to fall off the horse sometimes, and you are going to feel a bit battered and bruised, you know, because we're humans, right? And you do take rejection personally sometimes, and you have to dust yourself off, look at what you did, see if you can do it better, and then step up. And I used to say to my team, we used to come out of big pictures, and it was like, is there anything we could have done better? Anything at all? Long before we got the answer to whether we'd won it or not, what would we do differently? And if we truly think we've come out of it doing everything we can, then we've actually done the best that we can. And if we don't get it, and we should be proud of ourselves, and if we don't get it, then we have to do a bit of a, you know, dissection as to why and what we did differently, or maybe just perhaps there was someone better on the day. But I guess, you know, it's those knocks, and you just have to keep rallying, and as you say, it's tenacity, and it's having people around you, and knowing that you, and it's the passion and the belief in what you're trying to do. And hopefully that just gets it through, and you get as many ups as you do downs.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Absolutely. I know we are fast sort of running out of time. We've got a few minutes left. I mean, we've had one question here from Alex, and I don't know whether or not anybody's got a response to this, but have any members of the panel's teams, how have they reacted to having a female boss? Do you experience misogynistic behaviour or comments from employees? Has anybody experienced that kind of behaviour?
I would say maybe I'm just being very lucky being in the events industry, but never. I mean, I've had a few comments from clients, but, you know, you just, you know, you either ignore it, you choose to deal with it in your own way, and you turn it to your advantage. But I would say that certainly our industry sector, I've been quite fortunate, and that hasn't been the case.
I remember actually sitting and it's quite interesting actually. We did a big event for a very large global advertising network, and we had a whole load of corporate communication directors sitting in a room, and we were trying to direct the operations behind this big project. And very interestingly, for whatever reason, and whether or not it was whether it's because I was a woman or not, I don't know the answer to this, but no, people just didn't take me seriously because I wasn't backed up. There weren't other men in the room to back up the information that I was delivering. And I found that quite interesting. It wasn't necessarily outwardly misogynistic, but I've certainly felt that rather strange air of, okay, at the time I was relatively young, and I should say I was probably in my mid-30s at the time, sitting around a room of a variety of age groups, but probably older than myself. And I found that I was dealing with a situation where they just didn't necessarily believe the information that I was delivering. So that was quite an interesting scenario to find myself in. Yeah, does anybody else have any others? Farah?
Yeah, we've not had it with employees, but definitely with potential investors and people that want to partner, or we would want to partner with them as a brand. Lots of examples from saying, well, you know, isn't it a man's job buying a condom? What are you two doing? Like, why would we buy products from you? You're two women selling a man's job. When we've raised investment, one really well-known investor who I won't name, who didn't invest in Hanks, turned around and said, you need me, I can turn your business around, I know this business inside out, not you, so you can agree on X terms which were outrageous, and I'll turn your business around. And the way he said it, well, firstly, it was a bit of mansplaining. He thought he knew what women's views were on non-hormonal contraceptives, and he knew what it was like to take the pill, which I found quite shocking. And secondly, it was that whole, well, I know what I'm doing because I'm a man and I run this business. Well, do you have any idea what it's like to be a woman? Do you have any idea what it's like to be a woman carrying condoms and seen as promiscuous and all the challenges that come with that? No. So we have seen it, and men think, I'm not shaming all men because I was actually raised by two brothers, so I'm an equalist more than I am a feminist. But especially with our particular industry, we have men thinking they can say whatever they want to us, which is just disgusting. Like one of the investors said, can you show me can you demonstrate the product? And the outrage, I'm like, well, do you have daughters? Do you have a wife? Do you have this? Like, men, there were men that we've experienced with our business that have been misogynistic and absolute pigs. Not many of them, but there have been men.
Wow.
Wow. Not really much to say to that, I don't think. Yeah.
I think yeah. Gosh, wow. Yeah. I think there's definitely, having worked in the city for 20 years, I've come across misogyny plenty of times, but in a way, at least the misogyny, the obvious misogyny, you can see it coming, you can kind of deal with it because it's there and it's latent. It's this kind of benevolent sexism that I think is potentially more dangerous because it can be absolutely devastating, and you kind of are left thinking, did that really happen? And, I can think of examples where it happened to me. I went on maternity leave, and at the time, boss would be doing me a big favor to give my team to someone else because I was now had 2 children to look after and probably didn't want to be running a successful team anymore. And I think that those kind of things can happen a lot, and it's done in a situation where the men are thinking, they're making assumptions on your behalf about your level of ambition. And they're good guys, they're not the stereotypical misogynist that you could see coming a mile away. But it's absolutely something to be on watch for.
Yeah. We've had, there's a few other questions that people have very kindly posed, but I suspect we're unfortunately 2 minutes over time. So thank you to Caroline and Heather and Rachel and lots of other people who have posed questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to get round to. I don't know whether Beth or Tom, you want to round up, but I personally would like to say thank you so much to all the panelists. What an interesting selection of insights that everybody's been able to give, and it's been a pleasure being able to be a part of today's session.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you so much from all of us at Farah's to all of our panelists, to you, Charlotte, to Dr. Uoma, Lee, Domini, Farah, Anushka, giving up your time and sharing your fascinating and inspiring insights. It's been fantastic to have so many attendees this afternoon for such a brilliant session, and really, really appreciate it. Thank you. We'll be continuing our focus on diversity and inclusion within the entrepreneurs sector over the next few months. So we're supporting an all-parties parliamentary working party led by Jacqueline Winstanley, focused on inclusivity in the sector and in particular disability. So watch this space for more on that. And otherwise, just a huge thank you from me and Beth, wishing you all a great evening, and please do enjoy the rest of Entrepreneurs Week and any other sessions that you've